I have been with this woman for 13 years, married 11. We dated in high school for a short stint, about 2 years. And after high school, we went our separate ways. We broke up because I felt she wanted to hang out with her friends more in high school, which I thought was selfish at that age. But as I got older, I figured that may have been sort of controlling type behavior. Well, fast forward 5 years, she moved away, got involved with some guy, moved in with him, and I was told they were going to get married. But that didn't happen, so she moved back home and moved in with her parents until she could get on her feet. I didn't know this until I was out with a friend of mine at a bar, and I saw her with a group of her old friends. I walked over and asked, "Hey, what are you doing back?" She looked at me and said, "It was a long story." She eventually said that her boyfriend at the time messed around on her. After leaving her ex-boyfriend and settling in back home, she eventually got a job at the local hospital as a pediatric nurse. During this time, we saw a lot of each other, got close again, and started seeing each other. She wasn't the same person I dated in high school. I mean, she was an extrovert then, but more so now. We got really serious right around 2008. In 2010, we got married. She was still working at the hospital, and I was working to take over my dad's real estate company. To be honest, everything was good. I didn't want to buy a house yet. So, my dad owned a couple of houses, very nice homes at that, and told me I could stay in one of them until we were ready to actually buy our own. He wanted to sell them. He rented out so many of his homes over the years, and now he wanted to sell a couple. I actually thought our marriage was really good. We were well off, didn't struggle financially. We don't have any kids. She wasn't able to have kids due to a medical issue. But that didn't stop me from loving her, because she couldn't bear children. We had a close-knit group of friends. We would have date nights, go bowling together. As I said, everything was good. She belonged to a bowling league that she and a couple of her girlfriends did a few nights a week. I would attend some of her matches, but not all the time. I wasn't the jealous or controlling type. When she said she was hanging out with the girls, I didn't mind. She hung out with 3 women, 2 of them were married, and one of them was in a long-term relationship, so I didn't have any trust issues at the time. Plus, our bedroom life was great. I didn't complain, and neither did she. Well, at least not to me. The first 6 years of our marriage was awesome. We did everything together. She was working at the hospital and I was working with my dad at the real estate firm. Then, I noticed a slight change in the way she dressed. When she went to work, she always wore scrubs to work, but shortly after the beginning of the year, I noticed she was wearing certain clothes that fit her well. I really didn't think anything of it, because she didn't want to wear her scrubs. I figured maybe she is stopping somewhere before work. She had 12-hour shifts, but then she started coming home later than she used to, and she always had an excuse. She would say she was working overtime, or she had to stay late to finish something. I couldn't refute that, because sometimes her 12-hour shift would turn into 14, 15-hour shifts. So, her cheating on me never ever crossed my mind, just figured it was part of her job. This went on for about 6 months. Then, one day, I was at home. I left work early one day, at about 7:30 p.m. I hear my wife's car pull into the driveway, and I looked out the window briefly. To my surprise, she was on her phone, and she blew a kiss at someone. When she did that, she looked around to see if anyone was looking. She didn't see me, but that was strange and suspicious. When she got in the house, I asked her about that. She looked a little surprised, and she told me she was FaceTiming her mom, and she blew her a kiss. I said, "Oh, okay. Now remember, our bedroom life is still really good. It hasn't fallen off or anything." About 3 weeks go by. My wife says she and the girls wanted to take a vacation together to celebrate her recently getting a raise, just the 3 of them. Her other friend that works at the hospital with her got a raise as well. Their other friend doesn't work at the hospital. She works at a law firm, and they wanted to celebrate a little by going on a cruise for 5 days. They had to plan their vacation at the same time, so they can all go at the same time. Another month goes by, and they finally were able to have their schedules coincide with each other to take the vacation they wanted. I was suspicious at first, but I didn't want to spoil her mood and confront her about my feelings, so I didn't say anything. Well, that day, I was the one that took them all to the airport. Her other 2 friends, significant others, had to work, so I agreed to take them all. They were flying from Washington, D.C. to Miami, Florida. Before I dropped them all off, I told my wife to call me when she got to Miami, and I reminded the other 2 ladies to check in with their guys. They said they would. Well, to my surprise, I never heard from my wife until really late that night, and she sounded like she was drunk. She said her and her girlfriends are in her room drinking. I told her to be careful, we said goodnight, and I told her to call me the next day. Well, the next day came, and I didn't hear from my wife or her girlfriends, and I didn't call her either. So, she only had a few more days left on her cruise. When I got home that day, I checked the mail and noticed the phone bill was in the mail. The envelope was kind of thick. I opened it and started to look at it briefly, and wow, the phone bill was quite high this month. Upon further inspection, I noticed there was one particular number I didn't recognize. Actually, there were a couple of numbers I didn't recognize. So, I did a Google search on three numbers that wasn't part of my contacts. All of them had a New York City area code. I remembered that's where she was living with her ex-boyfriend before she came back home to DC. But why three numbers? So, I wanted to know, how can I find out who she is talking to without her knowing it? She has a smartphone. So, I called one of my friends. He is a certified geek. I tell him my concerns. He then tells me, "Dear, in 2021, you can clone someone's phone without even touching it." I said, "What?" He said, "That's possible now." I said, "I don't believe that." He then tells me, "Come to his shop and he will show me." He told me, since she had an iPhone, if I had access to her iCloud account, he could do it, and I did have access. He said, even if she deletes text messages, that won't matter. Sure enough, he showed me, and that's how I found out she was cheating on me. She was cheating on me before she left for her trip. She cheated with one guy here in DC, met him from a dating site. Apparently, the day she was supposed to be working, she would take her scrubs and pretend she was going to work, but calling off when she left the house. The other three numbers belonged to men from New York, and one guy was an ex-boyfriend. Apparently, they all met up in Miami and went on this cruise together. The most horrific thing, this is when I found out she was cheating with these three men on the cruise. I found that out because when the guys went back to their rooms, they were sending text messages back and forth to my wife. So basically, my wife and her girlfriends went on this vacation to cheat. Once I had all this information, I had planned to go see an attorney to ask him what I can do. My wife was scheduled to come back in a few days, so I had a lot to do. I contacted an attorney and asked him what my options were. He said, "We have to be separated." So, since I didn't own the house and she didn't own the house, I didn't think there would be an issue with spousal support. He tells me, even though she cheated, you still have to be separated for at least a year before you can proceed with the divorce. So, I thanked the attorney for his time and called my dad. I told him the horrific news about finding out my wife cheating on me, but I told my dad, the attorney said, I still had to be separated for a year, and he came up with the craziest idea. He told me, "I can send you a letter saying you have to be out by a certain date because I have a contract to sell the house. She has to go, but you can move into the other home." I said, "Wait, what if the house doesn't sell by that date?" He says, "That's not a big deal. She still has to go. Deals fall through all the time. She doesn't have to know that." My dad then says, "Go ahead and pack your things. I will help you move into the other home." He then asks, "When will my wife be back?" I told him she will be back tomorrow. My dad says, "He will be at my place within the next hour." So, after talking to my dad, I drove home and started packing my things. About an hour later, my dad pulls up in this big U-Haul and has two other men with him. We spent just under 3 hours getting all of my stuff. The only thing I left in the house was the bedroom set. Everything else, I took. We then drove to the other house, which she doesn't know about, and unloaded. After my dad and his two friends moved me, I made a call to one of my wife's friend's husband and asked him, could he pick them up from the airport tomorrow? I told him I had to work. He agreed. My next move was to go to Staples and print out all the text messages and put them in a big envelope and leave them on the kitchen counter. So, she will know that I found out that she was cheating before she left for her trip, and on her trip, once I took care of Staples, I called Verizon to change my number. I gave it to my dad and a few of my friends and told them why I was changing my number. They were floored. Well, the next day, little after 2 p.m., my dad calls me and says my wife was looking for me. She was frantic. He simply told her that he left for a good reason. He told me after he said that, she hung up the phone. A couple of my friends called me as well. They told me she was asking where I was. No one told her by this time. I knew she has been to the house and seen the envelope I left for her. So, I calculated that the separation clock would start from the day she got back. Since it wasn't mutual, I have to wait a year. In the meantime, my dad says he sent a certified letter to my wife saying that he had a contract on the house and a sale was pending, and she had to be out by a certain date. The week goes by. I asked my dad and some of my friends who had contact with my wife, have they heard from her lately? Was she still blowing up their phones? Well, they all said they really haven't heard much from her. So, I thought, okay, this is going as planned. Until I pulled up into the parking lot of my dad's business and she was waiting for me. As soon as she sees me, she jumps out of her car and runs over to me. I asked her what is she doing here? She said she wanted to talk. I told her, we have nothing to talk about, with the exception of divorce, I said. Other than that, we have nothing to say to each other. I walked off. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her just stand there. Once I walked into the building, I saw her get into her car and leave, even though she cheated on me. That was the hardest thing for me to do. I worshiped that woman, and for her to do that to me shattered me to the core. My dad came over and asked, was I okay after that? I told him, I will be okay. A couple of weeks go by, and I walk in the building and my dad said, my wife dropped off a letter for me. To my surprise, it's a long letter apologizing and she wanted to talk about separation. She goes on to say, she knows that's what I want and is willing to give it to me. I showed the letter to my dad. He then says, if you both agree, that means you don't have to wait a year. You can just be separated for 6 months and then file for your divorce in the letter. She said she would come back in a few days, here at my office to discuss it. Well, this is heartbreaking for me. I never thought this woman would cheat on me like that and with her friends. I don't know about the other guys. I don't know if they found out that their partners cheated on them. I didn't tell them, although I felt I should. But I didn't. I believe they will find out soon enough. I am grateful for the geeky advice I got about the phone thing. Cloning a phone never crossed my mind. I almost hired a private investigator, but that would have only gotten me evidence here in DC. I would have never known she was unfaithful with 3 other men on her so-called vacation cruise. Not sure if I will be back, but a friend of mine said I should give this forum a try. I am not divorced yet, but it